Okay, well, welcome again, everyone, and glad to know that things have been going well so far. The feedback from yesterday has been great, and we're here again today. We've got the presentation here today on drafting successful grant applications. This is the first of two on drafting grant applications. This one will be looking at studentships, postdoctoral fellowship opportunities in the UK, Mauritius, South Africa, and Nigeria, and it's done by the project team. So my name is Dr. Kene Igweonu. I'm the principal investigator for this BA funded project, and I'm academic dean for the Faculty of Arts and Creative Industries at Middlesex University London. I'll hand over to my colleagues to introduce themselves. Alexandra.
Hi everyone, my name is Alexandra Kokoli. I'm an art historian and I work with Kene at Middlesex University London. I'm co-investigator on this project.
And I'm Adeelah Kodabux from the Mauritius campus of Middlesex University. I'm a senior lecturer in international relations, and I'll be talking about application processes for a Mauritian context.
Thank you. Leora?
Morning, everyone. I'm Professor Leora Farber. I'm the director of the Research Center Visual Identities in Art and Design at the University of Johannesburg. And yes, have just been involved with practice-led research for about 20 years in various capacities. So I'm really enjoying this workshop and engaging with the conversations. Thank you.
And the fifth member of the team is Professor Sunday Ododo from the National Theatre of Nigeria. I think he may be having some connection issues, but he's here with us. Okay, so we're going to make a start. Just to give you a quick overview, we're going to start off with an introduction to doctoral and postdoctoral funding, and that will be delivered by Alexandra Kokoli. And then we'll then look at the funding bodies and opportunities in the different countries. So starting with the UK and Mauritius, we look at the UK, South Africa, and Nigeria. And then I'll come in towards the end to talk about writing successful proposals and funding bids. So over to you, Alexandra.
Thank you. I should have said also that I'm, of course, research associate at Leora Center in South Africa, which I really value. So if I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so I think for those of you who are not yet registered on a PhD program, I shouldn't have said not yet, but are very seriously considering it, perhaps after this series of workshops, the first thing to do, which again I started talking about in yesterday's mentoring discussions, is to wish traditional PhD by thesis that can be, of course, richly illustrated, but then illustrations are secondary and ancillary to the text. So the argument needs to be carried wholly by the text. There are various forms of practice-led PhD, and each university interprets that slightly differently, but it usually means a shorter thesis and then exposition of practice in a format that suits it. There's the professional doctorate, or if you're an artist, Arts D very often. And finally, very interestingly, a PhD by publication, which usually suits people with a sustained research practice, so that then becomes documented and contextualized in a shorter thesis or context statement for the submission. The next thing to do if you're employed at a university is to investigate whether your employer offers any incentives. So, for example, we know that many universities these days increasingly require their staff not only to be research active, but increasingly to have the PhD award, the PhD qualification. So in what ways can your employer help you achieve that? Very often there are fee waivers if you decide to undertake your PhD study at your employing institution. Do check with your line manager, but also crucially, if there's any research centers or other research initiatives, clusters in your institution, ask them for advice. In Britain, PhD funding is offered in different ways. You normally do not apply directly to funders for a funded PhD, but the major research councils, such as the HRC and the Leverhulme, they do fund PhD research, but by giving the money directly to universities, who then advertise competitive funded PhD opportunities. And eligibility for those is determined between funding bodies and universities. So you need to check case by case for every advertised opportunity. And we have given you here some search engines to help you with your search. Jobs AC UK, despite the name, there is some sort of bias towards the UK, but increasingly I have found myself, it lists international opportunities from across the world. And find a PhD again. And the next slides give you screenshots of what these search engines, oh, not yet. Okay, so we will show you some screenshots of these search engines and how to use them. So the UKRI invests quite a lot of money, about 380 million into doctorate search every year through participating universities. And PhD scholarships can work in a variety of ways. Many opportunities are fees only. Some others are fees and some a stipend, so a small salary, usually in the range of about 16,000 per year. That is UK pounds. Or they can also be a one-off award of this or discounted fees. So the value that you're getting varies case by case. So do look at each opportunity separately. And eligibility criteria will vary between scholarship programs and institutions as well. But funding is usually awarded on academic merit following a competitive application process. So it is your proposal will be judged by experts in the field. If it's artist-led, it is going to be fellow academics with in-depth experience in this type of research. Universities also fund their own studentships, and you can find details of these on the institution's website or by contacting potential supervisors, which is another way of approaching the issue. But such opportunities will be advertised in the databases that we've already mentioned. You will need to conduct several web searches and possibly follow these up with emails of inquiry to the contact people. So this is a screenshot from Jobs AC UK for the PhD search, and you can see how you can narrow it down by discipline. They give you various sort of, yes, that's fine, Kene, we can have the next one. So do try to sort of refine your search as much as possible. Find a PhD offers, again, a different kind of, it's a slightly different search engine, and there you can also search by country. And this is another website called Research Professional. It's one that I use as well. It's for researchers at every stage of career. You need to register and again, sort of give them some information about what you're looking for, including, of course, PhD bursaries. In my experience, Research Professional is actually, it does not offer as much refinement in the search, so it's quite a broad search, but sometimes when you're looking for a PhD, that's not such a bad thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I will be talking about the Mauritian context. Alexandra provided opportunities that apply to the British context. Having said that, we encourage you to consult the websites on there. They're really useful. Even for my undergraduate students, I encourage them to go on some of these websites in order to think about future career opportunities, and so on. So they are useful in understanding the sort of criteria that you can contemplate, and they do have other sort of advice and tips that they provide as well. So I've tried to contextualize the idea behind doctoral and postdoctoral funding bodies that we have for the Mauritian context, and I've looked for information. And one of the first portals that I came across was for the Ministry of Education, Tertiary Education, Science and Technology. And what I've observed on their website is that they do post scholarship opportunities for Mauritian students. You may see from a screenshot that I have here that they may apply to undergrad context or master's level, but I've seen previously that they advertise for PhD students as well in collaboration with other universities. So please do consult the website of the Ministry of Education and keep updated. And yes, I've looked at other opportunities available locally, including at other higher education institutions. The University of Mauritius has a doctoral school, and they have a website as well, including a contact person that I've seen on there. So it might be worth considering them and looking at the information that they offer. And from what I gather as well since yesterday, our discussions together, there is already a network that is in place, and there are connections among universities. And we are talking about going into research of practice-based researchers, encouraging practice-based research in Mauritius. So it might be worth talking with your heads of departments, line managers, and so on, and considering opportunities that are available and that can be shared across universities. The other one that I came across as well was for the Université des Mascareignes in Mauritius, and I've noted that they have a doctoral school as well. And of course, they have specific subject areas that they may be specific disciplines that they encourage postdoctoral research in. Having said that, remember, they have opportunities on an annual basis at different timelines. So keep going back to these websites, keep refreshing, or if you wish to get into contact with heads of departments there, please do so. Another interesting portal as well is the one of Open University Mauritius, where we have PhD, Doctor of Philosophy, and obviously a DBE as well that they offer. So that would be another platform for you to consider getting further information on doctoral opportunities in the local context. Now, in regards to funding bodies of research projects in Mauritius, there are a couple mentioned here. You have a Higher Education Commission, and their website is, from my perspective, regularly updated. And I would encourage you as well to be part of their mailing list. They do share regular information. I know that our school as well will receive regular updates, and they share it within respective departments. So do consider the Higher Education Commission and the Mauritius Research and Innovation Council as well. They are relevant sources of information and platforms to consider for further research, funding of research projects. However, from experience and from having consulted information on their websites, they tend to prioritize certain research areas, including life sciences, renewable energy, manufacturing, ICT, ocean, marine technology, and so on. Having said that, bear in mind that they do encourage collaborative projects as well. So that is something to bear in mind if you're considering getting research funding and you have a project in mind. The networks that we have in Mauritius, yes, it is a competitive environment, but also a platform that encourages collaborative research. So I am collaborating at the moment with researchers locally and the University of Bern. And we have applied for a research funding through the MRIC, even though we do not fit any of their priority areas per se. So I'm just saying that it's worth considering collaboration when it comes to research funding, and considering these portals for further information that I highly encourage you to regularly visit. Thank you. Yes, Alexandra. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So now I will tell you a little bit about the postdoctoral opportunities in the United Kingdom. Thank you, Kene. Firstly, there is the British Academy postdoctoral fellowships. It's very easy to find information about this, but briefly, there are 3-year awards made to an annual cohort of outstanding early career researchers in the humanities or social sciences, so 1 deadline per year. And of course, design, visual and performing arts do count for these purposes as humanities, as long as research outcomes are disseminated through peer-reviewed academic publication. And since there are such publications as the Journal of Artistic Research that was sort of profiled this morning, that should not be that difficult to achieve. Consider also the advantages of innovative ways of making your research public, and the advantages that artistic research can offer in terms of engagement and routes to impact. So publishing in this way, conducting research in this way is not, you needn't argue that it is as good as humanities, but perhaps in some senses better as well and more innovative. The purpose of these fellowships is to enable the award holder to pursue an independent research project towards the completion of a significant piece of publishable research. And in this context, independent means 2 things. So even if you normally work collaboratively, it should be you very much undertaking and doing almost all of the work, but also it is independent from your PhD research. And that's quite an important thing to keep in mind. The application is in 2 stages. There's the outline stage that's open to absolutely everyone that meets the eligibility criteria. And then the second stage, which is by invitation only for those shortlisted, or rather, shortlisted from the first stage. And the deadline for the first stage varies year by year, but it tends to be in mid-October. Now, eligibility is very interesting, particularly for an international audience. What they mean by early career, there is no age limit, but it is expected that you are within 3 years from the date of a successful Viva examination, not submission, but your final PhD exam. There are some exemptions, such as maternity leave, illness, and leave for any kind of care duties. British citizens and any nationals from the European Economic Area, subject to change, are regardless of where their doctorate was obtained, may apply. Also, anyone of any nationality that holds a doctorate degree from a UK university can apply. Next slide, please. And also, this is very important, anyone able to demonstrate a quote unquote strong prior association with the UK academic community, such as a significant period of at least a year at a UK institution in either a teaching or research position that is not permanent may apply. So even if you're not a UK or EU national and do not hold a PhD from the UK, there's still an opportunity to evidence a strong academic connection to the British academic community. There is a section at the end about tips on how to draft a proposal, but just to say very briefly that these fellowships are not conceived as a PhD extension. Even though the PhD qualifies you for this next stage and this next project, it is expected to be independent and new. It is very important to identify the correct institution, the correct university at which to undertake this fellowship, and you will need their support. So you need to make a very strong case about why you've chosen that institution to host you and how your research not only fits in, but enhances the research culture of that university. And of course, academic merit and publication are absolutely fundamental, but also persuading the board of the significance, currency, and value of your project, as well as your capacity to see it through. That means, of course, identifying a project that can be achieved within 3 years, but also that you specifically, having just undertaken doctoral research, are well placed to see it through. Finally, okay, the Leverhulme Trust Early Career Fellowships, there's some overlap there, but do please note some differences. Again, a 3-year full-time fellowship for early career researchers with a research record, but who have not yet held a full-time permanent academic post. If you have, that renders you ineligible, I'm afraid. And it is to undertake a significant piece of publishable work. The deadline tends to be around mid-late February, one annual deadline. You need to be early career for that as well, but they define it within 4 years of PhD submission, not viva. And again, career breaks are taken into consideration. And you must either hold a degree, any degree, not just the PhD, as with the HRC, from a UK higher education institution, or you must hold a fixed term academic position in a UK university, which commenced no less than 4 months before the closing date for this call. And again, tips, same as for the British Academy scheme, but also you should research the trust. So the Leverhulme is independent of UKRI and the UK government. The UKRI takes its cue about sort of agenda setting very much from the UK government. And the Leverhulme are less invested in the links between scholarly, social, and economic value. So in some ways, you can propose a more blue skies academic project to them. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we have Leora now.
Hi. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit just more about external funding, doctoral and postdoctoral funding opportunities in South Africa. But, you know, my sort of context that I come from is largely University of Johannesburg, so I can explain a little bit about how it works in that particular institution. So in South Africa, the main arts-based funder, and in fact for all research, is the National Research Foundation. They pretty much hold a monopoly in research funding, and they offer postdoctoral and postdoctoral and doctoral scholarships, and yeah, the NRF has several categories of funding. The most common category, which most people fit into, is the freestanding doctoral scholarship or the PDRF freestanding scholarship. Those are open to people from various disciplines, from almost all the disciplines, in fact, and are not limited to specific criteria. The criteria, you know, is that there is a 50% research component, which is something that is quite ambiguous, because funnily enough, the NRF does recognize creative research as research. So, you know, your creative research could be part of that 50% research component. Although I think most people still tend to think, when you read 50% research component, they tend to think that it would be a written, it would be the written contribution to the project. So it's not necessarily that. They also offer a scarce skills funding, which is actually considerably more than the freestanding bursary. And this is for people that can offer something very specific, that is, they're doing work in very specific areas that would make a contribution. That would make a contribution to the strategic priorities as set down by government for development in South Africa. And yeah, these do tend to prioritize the life sciences, health, science, technology, a little rather like it is in Mauritius. The arts are not seen as top priority, although they do feature as as one of the criteria for cultural cohesion. And usually if one is putting in an application for scarce skills, for any kind of doctoral or PDRF scholarship, one would emphasize the contribution it would make to cultural diversity and cohesion. So that is for arts-based funding. The scarce skills, as I say, is something that would be very in line with perhaps other areas of government priorities, such as life sciences, health, science, technology, etc. And then innovation would be, as it implies, if one is dealing with an area that really has not been researched, specifically in South Africa. You know, often there are areas of research that have been developed in other countries, other parts of the world, but are quite undeveloped in South Africa. So this is specifically about particular kinds of innovation that one can bring to the South African context. If I could just go back one slide, please. I think we've missed out. No, sorry, if we could go to the next slide. Yeah, right. Another source of arts-based funding is the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. They offer only doctoral scholarships. And strangely enough, this funding body is quite opaque. Nobody knows very much about it. And there's very little actually given on their website. So, you know, one actually needs to really contact the organization and try and find out more. One has to do considerable homework, whereas the NRF applications are very easy to access. The forms are online, there are manuals online, and yeah, it's quite very much more user-friendly. There are also NRF and departments of science and technology, SACHI chairs at many universities. These are very distinguished, almost like research centers or positions that offer postgrad, PhD and postdoctoral bursaries and degrees. And they usually provide full funding for PhDs and postdocs. One has to obviously look at each individual institution, what SACHI chairs they have, and what kind of funding they offer. The two that I know of in the arts fields is the South African Research Chair in South African Art and Visual Culture, which is at the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture at the University of Johannesburg, and that is led by Professor Brenda Schmarman, and the Geopolitics and the Arts of Africa SACHI Chair in the Visual Art Department at Rhodes University, headed by Prof. Ruth Simbayo. Now, in the cases of the NRF, I didn't actually mention, usually what happens is the NRF bursary is awarded and matching funding is provided by the institution. So you might find if you go to the NRF's website, the actual amount that they stipulate to be awarded isn't all that much. But I certainly know that in cases like UJ, the institution itself provides this, is obligated, in fact, to provide the same amount of funding as top-up funds or matching funds to the NRF bursary. This is because NRF bursaries are considered, well, put it this way, in South Africa, and certainly in institution like UJ, there is huge support for postdoctoral fellows and PhD studies. And a little as Prof. Alexandra mentioned, there's also huge pressure and incentives offered to staff at universities to upgrade their qualifications and definitely get PhDs. So you will usually find that in institutions, there is particular kinds of support which are offered if you are actually able to get the funding from bodies such as the NRF. Okay. Then the rest, these arts-based funding opportunities that I've put down here, I think it might be a bit misleading to say there actually are arts-based funding opportunities. I've put them down more as potential or sources that one might try to get art-based funding, and that they don't necessarily exclude arts-based research. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to be favorable towards it. And they might, it's a bit like, yes, they might be open to this, but they might not. So some of these are quite specific. Die Suid-Afrikaanse Akademie vir Wetenskap en Kuns offers doctoral scholarships, but, well, it's master's and PhD students. And they say it's any subject discipline within the Faculty of Humanities or Sciences. But the caveat here is that this is only intended for students who are studying through the medium of Afrikaans. So it is very specific and geared particularly to a particular demographic group. Then there are Fulbright scholarships, doctoral scholarships. And this is obviously in conjunction with the the American Fulbright program, which would enable scholars to do at least one academic year of research or even non-degree study at a US academic institution. Again, I would imagine that those candidates or the people that are awarded the Fulbright scholarship would need to be working in a way that actually relates the specific context and the kind of work that they're doing in South Africa to a UX context. So, that there is some way of bridging or engaging in some kind of conversation between the two contexts. Other possible arts-based funding is the Erasmus Mundus program, which offers doctoral scholarships. And this is the program that runs in conjunction with European institutions. It could be a joint degree that is being offered. Yeah, it's usually a joint degree, in fact. And research would take place for selected periods in both the European and the South African context. There's also the Rhodes Scholarships for study at the University of Oxford in England. These are doctoral scholarships. And this seems relatively open-ended. It doesn't seem to have that many criteria, but obviously one would need to consult the website to be sure of that. And the Department of Science and Innovation has recently launched the DSI-CSIR Interbursary Program, or a grant scheme. And this is, again, to support capacity development in strategic priority areas. And these priority areas are defined by government. And they usually will, are in line with very strategic needs and focus areas within the country. Okay, then the rest that I've listed here are really funding in the social and natural sciences, in medicine, economics, even, and in technology. So I'm not going to go into great detail about them, but one can go to their websites and find out a little more. Just on, Grasser, Michelle, all of these are really, sort of more social and natural sciences orientated, medicine, economics, and so on. Just to mention a couple of things around practice-led research in South African institutions. There are several institutions that do offer practice-led doctoral degrees. And this is a relatively new innovation. It has only been around for maybe about 5 years, maybe 10 years in some South African institutions, those being the University of Pretoria, the University of Johannesburg, and Stellenbosch University. And these doctoral degrees allow you to do a component of one's degree as practical or creative output. To varying degrees. Each institution has their own weighting for practical and written components. I know that UJ's one is very flexible and allows for, let's say, if you want to do an 80% practical component and a 20% written component, that is also fine. So a lot depends also on individual institutions, where you apply, and what their practices are in regard to funding, and how they relate to major funding bodies like the NRF. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Okay.
Thank you, Leora. I don't know if Professor Ododo's internet is now stable enough to speak on the Nigeria opportunities. Professor Ododo, are you there? Okay, maybe we'll put this in the mentorship session so he can kind of run through them. But you've got a list of different scholarships that are available for doctoral and postdoctoral students in Nigeria that he was going to speak to. So he will pick up on that during the mentorship session. So I think we can go straight to look at this last session, which is on writing successful proposals and funding bids. And before I kind of kick off on this, I just want to say very quickly that in my experience in terms of assessing bids, is that I'm a peer reviewer for the UKRI's AHRC, which is the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So I review bids for them, and I sit on the panels that make the decisions about funding. I also review for the South African Research Foundation, where I review for their rated researchers. These are academics that are already imposed, and to get the rated their rating in South Africa, I review some of that work for the National Research Foundation of South Africa. So I've got quite an extensive experience of reviewing grant applications and bids. These are just some, what I present here are mainly some tips to help you make sure that you are writing the best proposal possible. In a sense, you're putting your best foot forward, as they say colloquially. So before you start writing your proposal, it's really important, I can't stress that enough, that you assess your chances of success. So what are the world's most important problems? What are the key problems that your research tries to solve? The funders are not just there sitting there with a pot of money to give away to everybody. They want people who will make key impact in society or in research or in different areas. So one of the ways to think about the key problems, the important problems of the world, is to think the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's always a good place to start from and say, how can you address one or more of these problems through your research? Seek feedback on the concept note. So once you've identified what the problem is that you want to solve with your research, you drop a concept note and seek feedback from that. or on that, think about the team that will that will help to write that project, to run that project. Increasingly, research councils are funding collaborative projects. For example, this workshop project that we are doing is a collaboration between the five of us. And that is what funders are looking for. They are not, the era of the sole researcher is kind of not, I think is beginning to pass. So for research projects generally, I'm talking about, it's always good to think about collaborators. Obviously, if a PhD project, unless you're working on a PhD topic that's already been identified, where you come in as a researcher to do your PhD on a particular defined topic, you're often a sole researcher. But where you have opportunities to bring in a team, always think about that and make sure you have the right team. So another question to ask yourself is, what networks do you have access to? Who are your potential collaborators? Most of you, or if not all of you, will already have networks that you belong to. And one of that hope for this project is that at the end of this project, this will morph into an early careers network for practice-based researchers. But you've got to think, what networks do you belong to? How can you draw on that network to help? So draw your network, see if there are certain criteria that are particularly important for the specific funding that you want to go for your doctoral or postdoctoral studies, especially when it involves cross-council or interdisciplinary calls. It's really important to make sure that you're reflecting the different expertise and disciplinary interests required for that call. What access do you have to institutional or university research support? One of the things about PhD funding I find is that often people that are applying for PhD don't understand that they actually have access to institutional support, even though they are not already there. So you can get in touch with a potential supervisor, for example, and they can help you craft your proposal. So think about the access you have, the support you have to institutions, or perhaps where you did done your master's supervisor, dissertation supervisor may be able to help you refine your proposal as well. And also always look at the type of projects that have been funded in previous calls, and then look for the gaps that you might be able to fill. So remember, it's the priorities are set by the funders. So the funders are not just waiting to fund your project, they want to fund projects that fit their priority areas. So it's really important that you think, what are the areas that these funders tend to fund, and how can I fit into that? And then only apply if your project idea fits within the call. A lot of applications I see, for example, for PhD research, or for research grants more generally, we often have some ideas that are very creative ideas but don't fit the remit of the call. So always make sure that your project fits the call before you apply for it. Okay, clear your diary. Grant writing is not something you do on the cuff. It's not something you do midnight today to submit tomorrow. It's something you do need some time, a couple of weeks, to really write your draft, send it for feedback, rework it, and get multiple feedback from different sources before you do submit it. So very importantly, before I go on, I just want to dispel a couple of myths that we have about grant writing. We often think, oh, the best research will be funded. The research body is going to fund the best research grant. It's not always the best research application that is funded. It's the one that makes the most impact. So what impact is your research making, and how does that fit the funder's priority? So it might be the best research idea, but if it doesn't fit the funder's priority, then it's not going to work. Same for PhD as well. If an excellent PhD proposal does not necessarily get you supervision and scholarship, what gets you supervision and scholarship? A PhD scholarship that is excellently written, a proposal that is excellently written, but also one that has the relevant expertise within the institution to supervise it. So very, very important. The supervision is very important. Funders only fund gurus. It's another myth. Funders are not looking for gurus to fund people who are already at the top of their career, or people who are already at the top of their game. but they do want people who will strive for excellence. So really important. Often people assume that they know what needs to get funded. So they just put in their proposal thinking that, but do some research around what the funders want to fund and not what you think will be funded. This one is another one that people think, oh, well, I've got to keep this idea to myself because I don't want somebody else to steal it. Share it, get people to give you feedback. If you keep it to yourself, you're not going to get that feedback. So make sure that you share your ideas, your proposal ideas with your friends, your colleagues, and get feedback from them. They will fund me because they funded my colleague. Again, that's an argument that people again assume that that's the case. Funders fund on case by case basis, so make sure that the case you're putting forward is a solid one. This one is one that perhaps I find myself in it, that some academics find writing easy. Very early on in my career, I used to think that some people find it easy; they can just write it. But absolutely, I think every researcher do find challenges with writing, particularly writing in a kind of rigorous way that you need for this kind of research applications. So give yourself some space to do the work. That actually speaks to this next one about writing during the holiday. We find that I find that when I set to write things during holidays, I end up not writing them because holidays are time for relaxation. So if you're going to write during your holiday, find a special time within that general holiday period to write. This is another one that I just want to flag. I must use up all the characters or spaces allowed. The funders, when they say that they this is write 4,000 characters, for example, for a section, the expectation is not that you write you complete 4,000. The idea is that you don't exceed it, but you don't have to write everything. This is for those of us within institutions already. Alexandra talked about funding within the institutions. Often when we are making bids, people think, oh, well, they're going to delay it if I get in touch with the research office early. Research office are there to support you, so please use them. This last one, as somebody that sits on the panel that look at these bids, the panel will read your bid, but not in the kind of detail that you presume they will read it. So often how you start your bid, so it's really very important. It sounds like oh well, kind of heresy, but actually the people who are reviewing your bids are very busy people. So it's really important that you write your bid in a way that encourages reading. If they start reading and it just doesn't encourage reading because it's not easy to read or it's not interesting enough, you'll find that they don't actually take the time to read the rest of your work. So it's really important the first few sentences in your proposal. So now, having got that out of the way, making the actual bid. Always think about contacting the potential funder. Don't write the bid in isolation of the funder, thinking you understand the call well enough, unless, of course, you understand it well enough. Funders are always willing to engage, to answer your questions and clarify things for you. Read the rules and the guidelines again. Engage with the policy areas that your research speak to. I'm bringing this out because these are things I see in the bids that I review for the HRC, for example, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, that often you receive some applications, some bids, that you kind of begin to wonder whether the person has actually read the guideline properly. So as much as it sounds mundane, it's very key, very important. If it's something that needs a project team, make sure you assemble the right team. The right team can make or break your application. And like I said before, multiple drafts, make time to do multiple drafts, very important. And once you've done multiple drafts, what do you do with your drafts? Try them on your friends and colleagues, get people to read it and offer you feedback. And one of the key questions you've got to always ask yourself in making your application is, would the world be any different if my application were not funded? In other words, have I made a compelling case for the urgency of this particular project? And again, link back to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals might be a good way to start, but make a compelling case. So in writing it, here are some other tips for you. Ensure you have fundable research questions before you design the research and work plan or the impact of that research. So what research questions are you trying to address? Are those research questions the type that the funders are looking to fund? Do they speak to the funders' priorities? Ensure you have clearly articulated and evidenced the rigor, the originality, and academic significance of the research and a strategic fit to the. Sorry, my dog is scratching everywhere. Let me let him out. My apologies. Yeah, he was in the room with me, but just got impatient and wanted to leave the room. Okay, where was I? Um, so ensure that you've clearly articulated and evidenced the rigor. Bits you need to be rigorous in your writing, to make sure that you're getting the right attention, like I said, so that people can actually read the work itself. Each research question or aim needs to be original and significant in academic terms. Um, you should be able to sum up your contribution in a single memorable sentence. And I talk about writing this in about 65 words later on. But don't lose sight of the funder's aim. Don't lose sight in getting excited about the work you're writing. Don't lose sight of what the funders are looking for. Always check back that you haven't deviated from the funder's aim or the aim of the call itself. And then connect work plan to research questions very clearly. Consider a diagram. This is again something that, as creative people, as people who work in the arts and creative industries and humanities, often we forget that, to put that into the work itself. So think about maybe diagrams that help to explain your research design, for example. Think about including that within the proposal. And plan your time to get multiple reviews. I've said that several times, and that's something I keep coming back to because it's really, really important. I've talked about making sure that your work is inviting to read, because the reviewers don't have all the time in the world to read all your 10,000 word proposal if they don't get hooked in the first few sentences. But part of the strategy also is to have a lot of white spaces. So one of the things I find in some applications, you tell somebody, for example, to write only 2 pages long, and they make the letters smaller, they make the font smaller, and they cram in all the text in the proposal. That is not inviting for a reviewer to read. So make sure you include a lot of white spaces, double spacing in your work, and a lot of white spaces to make it more inviting to read. So ensure that it's readable. Write short sentences, not a paragraph sentence. I've seen some bits, for example, where a sentence is a paragraph long, and halfway through the sentence, you've lost track of what the person is trying to say. Memorable title. So what's the title for your proposal? Whether it's your PhD proposal or postdoctoral application, choose a title that is memorable, a title that is short and straight to the point. One of the things I always say to my PhD students when they are thinking about what title to choose is to have a look at books or journal articles and see how people frame the titles for the books and journal articles, and then work backwards towards your own title and see if you can frame it like that. Have a clear summary. I've talked about this before, making sure you have a one sentence or 2 sentences that describe your project, but also having a clear summary. Often funders will ask you to write a summary that describes your research in layman terms for the public. So make sure you have that as well. And learn from journalism, how they articulate and write for the general public. You're not just writing for the expert in your field. That's in terms of your summary. One of the things I really find very useful is the Gunning-Fox Index, which is essentially a readability test. So apply that readability test to your work and see if it's easy to read and easy to follow, and follow your argument. The true line of your argument comes out very clearly. The proposal is not a place to show off your knowledge of complex terms. So if you're going to use complex terms in your proposal, make sure that you're unpacking them, you're really explaining them. Don't just put it in there and assume that your reader, because they're experts in the field, know what you're trying to say, or know that you understand those terms as well. So I've talked about the one or two sentence summaries. So 60 or 65 words. Can you write a 60, 65 words version of your proposal, of your entire proposal or a research idea? So that kind of like an elevator pitch. For those of you that have done elevator pitch, which is about 30 seconds. Can you write something like that? And then read out the summary to your family and friends again for feedback, as you would for the main body of the work itself. And just to end, this is a formula that I found really useful, incredibly useful actually. That kind of sums up everything I've said in terms of how to frame your proposal. So you need an arresting idea for doing Z. So Z is what the funders want to do, what they want to fund, and which is what you want to address with your research. So you need an arresting idea, an idea that is very captivating in order to do something, and that something is Z. And then you apply the Harvard formula for writing the bid. So the title of the bid to do Z. So your title always has to include the Z in the title. So for example, our workshop was pitched for early career research in practice-based research, and that had to be reflected in the title of our project. So your title has to be about the bid to do Z, to do the Z, which is what the funders want, which is what your own research questions try to address. Now, in terms of background, why is Z important? So you've got to really offer a cogent argument, an articulation of why that idea is really important, what the impact you're trying to achieve is really important, which demographic, which community, where does that impact sit, who does that work impact most is really important. And then of course, request for support. So there you're saying I will do X1, and this will show Y1, which reveals the first step towards Z. So remember, Z is the impact that you're trying to create. So you go again, X2, we do Y2, which reveals next step to Z, and the same with X3, which shows Y2, which reveals the third step to Z. So these are kind of how you list that out. And often this can be framed as research questions. So this may be your research question. So what I've called request for support here are essentially your research questions, which you then develop in the rest of the proposal. This is the summary of it. So you're saying that that the Y1 to 3, which I'm going to show, will add up to Z at the end of the project. So all your research questions, the 3 research questions or so thereabout that you have, will have to, at the end of the day, result in the impact, which is the Z that you set out at the very beginning to address, and which the funders set out also to address through funding your project. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to say. Just to draw my knowledge from looking at bits to kind of talk to you about some of the key things that we often overlook, but those things are really important. Some of them are mundane, but they are really important to making sure you have a bid that can be successful, that certainly puts you in position to be successful. I don't know if you have any questions before we move on to the next panel, because I recognize that we've overrun a little bit here.
Yes, thank you, Kene. Any immediate questions? Nope.
No. Okay. So we're gonna go straight to the next presentation. Let me just check out schedule.
Yes, we should have started at 11:30, but I think we'll be okay. Yep.
Okay, so over to you, Adeelah, then. Over to you.